Okay, so I know that's not supposed to happen. Welcome back to GP Outdoors. Today I'm going to talk to you about the rear PTO on the tractor. We're going to talk about how it works, and I also want to cover 3 different types of protection available to you and why it's important to have that, including what this thing is and why you might need to buy one for your tractor. Let's do it. So let's start with a little context. If you're a new tractor owner, you may not have experienced it yet, but you will eventually, especially when you start buying implements for the rear of the tractor that run off of your rear PTO. The first thing you're going to find out is that this shaft does not spin freely. It's kind of stuck there when it's not in operation. That kind of poses a challenge when you're trying to hook up an implement and you're trying to align the spline of the PTO shaft from your tractor with the female end of this PTO shaft extension to your implement, because you have a heck of a time trying to get them lined up when this thing won't turn. If you've used an implement previously, put nothing on it, and then a few days later or a week later you put the same implement on, you'll find that the splines line up because this PTO shaft is in the same position it was the last time you used it. Let me explain why. The reason the shaft won't turn is because inside here there's what they call a hydraulic PTO brake. When the PTO is not engaged or in use, the brake is applied and it stops it from turning. A little tip that I learned from Mac Uno years ago: if you're trying to hook up an implement to the rear end, just do this. Take your PTO selector and move it from the rear to the mid PTO. That will release the brake off of the rear PTO and allow it to spin freely. Makes it a whole lot easier to line up the spline on your implement and get it connected. There are 2 functions here inside the tractor that are important to today's discussion. One is your PTO selector. That selects the rear and mid, or mid PTO only. And this is your PTO clutch lever. This engages the clutch on whichever PTO you've chosen. So we know that within this housing, there's the hydraulic PTO brake, which holds that shaft and holds it, grips it tight so it doesn't move when it's not in use. There's also a hydraulic clutch pack for the PTO and its associated components. When you purchase a PTO-driven rear implement for the tractor, you're going to find that that PTO shaft extension is going to come with some type of protection. And that protection is intended to stop any type of unexpected or undesirable forces or energy from transferring from the implement through the shaft and back into that housing and possibly damage any of those PTO-related components inside that housing. Let's talk about what you'll see. If you're purchasing a PTO implement, which I would kind of categorize as a low impact type of an implement, so for example, my finish mower, my small diameter chipper, my front mount snowblower or rear mount snowblower, the skidding winch, those types of implements will come with kind of what I would call a first level or a basic type of PTO protection. Your shaft's going to look like this. It's a telescoping shaft. As you can see, they're all like that. You'll have one end here with no protection, and on one end of the shaft, you're going to see a shear bolt. That's your protection against shock or unexpected forces trying to travel from the implement through the shaft and into the back of your tractor, which can cause damage to those components we discussed earlier. Your shear bolt protection looks something like this. It's pretty standard. On the implement end of this PTO shaft, you'll see the shear bolt right here. You'll see there's a split in the end, right down the middle, and the shear bolt goes in between these 2 pieces. As that PTO shaft spins, if the implement, for example, hits a rock, or you're using the chipper and you jam a big limb in there and it jams it, and you get this shock or this immediate, almost instantaneous force that gets pushed through the shaft, this shear bolt will snap, stopping any of that energy from going forward to the tractor and into your PTO housing, thereby protecting your tractor from damage. Any PTO shaft I've owned always has a picture on it. There's a picture of a tractor on one end, and then there's a picture, or there's a dead end here, which is your implement end. If over time this picture wears off, one simple rule of thumb is that the protection for the PTO is not at the tractor PTO end. It's always at the implement end. So if you don't see that picture or it's worn off, you know that whichever end has the shear bolt, that's the end that you attach to the implement, not to the tractor. The shear bolt is going to look something like this. You'll notice there's a shank here, and then what I'd consider kind of a chamfered ring at the bottom of that shank before you get to the threading. This is the point at which that shear bolt will snap under the right amount of force thereby protecting your PTO on the tractor. When I buy them by the bag. That way I've got lots on hand and I don't end up in that position I was once years ago. You're in the middle of doing work, you snap a shear bolt, you got no spares, your day's done. And you're heading into the nearest town to try to buy some more. For my Kubota implements, I buy them just directly from Kubota. It's just easier that way. I may pay a few bucks more, and I do mean just a few bucks. But most of your implements that you purchase that are shear bolt protected will usually have a parts list in the back. And you'll see the shear bolt listed and the part number. That way you'll always have them on hand. A second type of protection, which is pretty common, is what they call a slip clutch. So instead of having a shear bolt on this PTO shaft extension, you'll see inside here, there's a different mechanism for managing any type of shock or unexpected forces that are incurred by the implement from traveling into your PTO housing. The slip clutch is pretty common. Pretty much any bush hog I've seen always comes with a slip clutch. And that's what I would call a more higher impact type of an implement. When you're pulling this through your field, slipping along at 540 RPM on your PTO, these big steel blades have built up a lot of momentum or a lot of force or energy. Basically, I think in my own words, when those blades encounter something and it changes or it causes, kind of a shock or a force, which slows the blades to be slower than the speed of the PTO from your tractor, that slip clutch will give or slip to allow the PTO from your tractor to continue spinning even though the blades temporarily are spinning at a different speed. You've got different types of protection for any of your implements that make sure that any unwanted or dangerous, I'd say, force or energies are not transferred from the implement through your PTO and into this PTO housing and causing damage to the components. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of the video. You're probably thinking, if you've got all that protection for your PTO, what is this and why do I think you might need one? This is called an overrun clutch. Some people call it a drag clutch, and it has a completely different job in protecting your PTO than the other two methods I just showed you. It's different. It's not the same. A few weeks ago, one of our subscribers from our community here on GP Outdoors contacted me. Pretty excited. I believe it's his first tractor. Bought an LX2610, bought a bush hog, a chipper, and I'm not sure what else. But he was calling me because his dealer recommended he gets one of these. And so he called me and asked me why I don't use one on the channel. And I jokingly said, well, it's because I don't even know what it is. The truth is I wasn't joking. I didn't know what it was. So I got to work. When I showed this to my neighbor guy, I asked him if he knew what it was. He immediately smiled and nodded his head. Here's why. Because this is Guy's old tractor. It's a Ford 8N. It actually still runs. Husky Bob still uses it for his garden. And they keep this one around for parts. Oh, and hey, for you folks that are interested, there's a little update on Husky Bob's garden this summer. It's coming along really nice. He's pretty happy with it. Pretty soon we'll be out here eating veggies. What I understand is these old Ford 8Ns, as well as probably some other old tractors, were notorious for not being able to stop when you're running something that had a big mass spinning behind it, like a bush hog. All of that energy and that force would continue to push the tractor forward because it wasn't an independent PTO. And until those blades finally wound down and stopped, the tractor would keep going forward no matter how hard you were pushing on the brake, according to Guy. In fact, there's dozens of YouTube videos on it as well. I'd say Tractorman 44 could probably explain it a lot better than I did today, and maybe he'll comment in. So you're probably thinking, GP, what do I need one of those for? I have an independent PTO. That's not a problem anymore. Well, let me explain why. So here's my understanding. When your PTO selector is on the rear, for example, as I mentioned earlier, there's a hydraulic PTO brake that's engaged and stops that PTO from spinning. That's why you can't spin it freely with your hand. When you engage your PTO clutch, hydraulic pressure is released from the brake and applied to the hydraulic clutch for your PTO. PTO begins spinning. Then, of course, you take it from idle, you rev your engine RPM up to that red line or wherever your 540 is, use your implement. Before you disengage or shut the tractor down, you bring your engine RPM back down to idle, You disengage the PTO clutch, at which time the hydraulic pressure is released from the clutch and it's immediately applied to the hydraulic brake, stopping your PTO shaft from turning instantly, pretty much instantly. So here's the challenge. When you're running a chipper with a 125 or 150 pound rotor spinning and building momentum and force, or a stump grinder with a big mass that's spinning, or big heavy blades underneath a bush hog, which have built up force or energy, and you immediately disengage your clutch, apply a brake to your PTO, these big heavy masses of steel can't stop instantly. They continue to spin until they wind down and stop. What happens inside your PTO housing? The tractor applies the brake to stop it instantly, but that mass that's spinning in that bush hog or that chipper, that stump grinder, or any other type of implement that has a big mass spinning, the force of that is most likely greater than the brake's ability to hold that shaft. So the implement kind of drives your shaft to keep spinning until the implement slows to a stop. And that just continues over time to wear out the brake holding that PTO shaft inside the housing. So your overrun clutch compensates for that. You connect it to the back of your PTO. When the brake is applied, because you've disengaged the PTO clutch, your PTO stops and your overrun clutch allows the implement to keep spinning until it winds itself down and stops without damaging the brake or any of the components inside your PTO housing. There's a couple of different designs to these overrun clutches. My dealer was kind enough to talk with me about it first before he got this in for me. This is what I'd call kind of a temporary one, as opposed to a permanent attachment. A lot of these have a roll pin. You apply it to your PTO, you hammer in a roll pin, so it's not permanent. You could remove it, but it's not easy to remove it, obviously. This one here just connects like a PTO shaft with a pin. Get her in there, push the pin, lock it in, connect your implement, use your implement, and when you're using something else, it comes off just like a shaft does. I like the temporary design of this model because I can put it on when I use my chipper and I can take it off when I'm using other implements. The other benefit to this is when Husky Bob or Guy are bush hogging or using his chipper on the L3400, they can borrow it, throw it on the back, use it, and give it back. That way we both don't have to buy one. So do you need one? Well, like many things on the channel, I share the information, but I can't tell you what's right for you on your property. I don't know what type of implements you use, but if I were you, the first thing I'd do is call my dealer. Let him know what you're using the tractor for, and he'll tell you whether or not whatever brand or model or manufactured tractor you have, whether or not this is a benefit or a good idea or if it's warranted. I understand that if you're using a bush hog or a chipper once in a blue moon, it's not a big deal over time. But if you're constantly or regularly bush hogging or stump grinding or using some type of implement that has a large mass that builds up that energy and needs to slow down, it might be a good idea to get one of these and put it on the back of your PTO. If you do decide this is something you need, don't forget to make sure that you remeasure and recut the PTO shafts on whatever implements you're going to use it with, because you've added probably another good 6 inches to the length of that shaft out the back of your tractor. So hey, let's wrap it up. Before I finish up, I wanted to send out a big thank you to the subscriber out in Eastern Ontario that contacted me and informed me about this overrun clutch. I'd like to mention his name, but I forgot to ask him if it was okay in public. But you know who you are, and I greatly appreciate the time that you spent with me. Another big thanks to Roger and the mechanic Jimmy, my favorite mechanic at Larkin Kubota out in Stouffville, who spent a lot of time, also researched with Kubota Canada what brands or what types of overrun clutches were recommended, and got one into the shop for me pretty quick. I'm pretty happy with the choice. And hey, for those of you that are new to the channel, please know I'm not a mechanic, and I'm not very mechanical or technical at all, so I've tried to explain this in, I guess, my own words or layman's terms as best I can. I think I have a reasonably good grasp on what I've explained to you, and I'll leave the information with you, and I wish you all the best. Have a great week with your families. Please be kind to one another, and I'll see you again right here. I'm Gord Potter, and you've been watching GP Outdoors. Cheers.